Own the Rhythm, the Blueprint series. I am Phillip Lanos, your host. This show is about how personal philosophy affects creative work and life. You'll hear from successful writers, vloggers, and business content creators that are living proof of the benefits of discipline. Beyond bragging rights, this show is about sharing their blueprint with you. Open heart, open mind, and ask questions. Maybe this is the blueprint for you. So I want to tell you a little bit about the author and professor that I'm speaking with today. His name is David Kadavy. He's got a top 20 Amazon best-selling book named Design for Hackers, and he's the host of his own podcast named Love Your Work. Now, prior to writing Design for Hackers, David led design at 2 Silicon Valley startups, freelanced for clients such as Odesk, PBWorks, and User Voice, and launched numerous startups of his own, none of which failed hard enough to be worthy of mention in this bio. David's work has won international awards that only design snobs have ever heard of, and his free email courses have taught over 100,000 people the fundamentals of good design. David's been featured on The Huffington Post, Inc.com, Quartz, The Observer, Upworthy, TechCrunch, Lifehacker, South by Southwest, and TEDx. And now, without further ado, I give to you David Kadavy. David, thank you so much for coming on here. And I think that you are the right person to be talking to because you are a published author and a damn good one at that, with top 20 now in Amazon, which is an accomplishment.
Yeah, it did. It made it in the top 20 on opening day. So that was pretty exciting. I didn't expect that.
I work with people in being able to help them create their podcasts. And one of the things that I often get resistance with is that they don't even know where to start, how to generate a topic. They don't have the confidence or they feel like it's going to be a lot of accountability, a lot of time. And getting past that resistance is something that I know that you've worked on thoroughly for creative work. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I can use my own podcast as an example. It's in some ways, it's not the best example because I did postpone starting a podcast for maybe 4 years.
Wow.
And even longer. I mean, I remember fantasizing about it for the first time, like when there were first podcasts in 2004, 2005, when I was listening to podcasts then, thinking about, maybe I should start a podcast. Nah, it's too much work. And then that kind of dragged on for 10 years. Before I finally started a podcast. But there were mental tricks that I employed to get myself going. So one was I basically decided I was going to start the podcast. And so I sent out an email to somebody who I thought would accept an interview and say, okay, I'm starting a podcast and let's schedule an interview. So there I scheduled the interview. Now, at that point, I didn't even have a name for the podcast. I didn't have artwork for the podcast. I didn't necessarily know exactly what my podcast was going to be about. I just kind of had a feeling of the people that I wanted to interview, the type of content that I wanted. I had listened to enough podcasts so that I knew that the podcast that I wanted to listen to didn't exist. So that's why I made my podcast. I mean, I to this day feel 100% prepared to quit if I ever come across a podcast that is, exactly the podcast that I wanted to listen to, which is why I started my podcast. So I sent out the email and did that interview and then did a lot of brainstorming, had a working name for the podcast. Then I experimented with editing it myself and kind of doing dry run, casual recording of an intro, cutting together music before I even had any rights to the music, just to kind of see what it felt like. And then this is employing that idea of doing the part of the project that is going to inspire you and motivate you to do the rest. So that's what I did. And then eventually things fell into place. And I've had enough experience doing other smaller projects that are creative projects where there are a lot of these unanswered questions in the beginning. I had enough experience with that to at least have a feeling for, okay, what can I handle? What questions can I leave unanswered for a certain amount of time, and what questions can I kind of make up as I go? So then eventually I did, come up with a name and artwork, which I revised that artwork within like a few months after I was done. What is this podcast about? That's a constant journey. it's okay to have a lot of unanswered questions. And I liken it to improv. So I've taken a lot of improv classes, lived in Chicago. So Second City was there, and I could take improv classes there, and took improv classes in other places. And so like one of the things that you learn is to be able to speak in front of your classmates. You got to start a scene now, and you're just making it up as you go, and you're yes-anding. Like your scene partner indicates that you're working in a pizza shop. And then, so yeah, that's your reality now. You're working in a pizza shop and you're just building upon that concept. Creative work is like that. It's improvisational. You have to be ready to think on your feet and yes, and the things that are going on. And that's where good work comes from, I think.
Okay, yeah, it's sort of the old entrepreneur mantra of take a leap of faith and build a parachute on the way down.
Yeah, in some ways it is. I think it's really finding places where you can take little leaps and you have some idea of where you're going.
I recall you saying something that I thought was brilliant. And you had highlighted that oftentimes an entrepreneur may bask in the I'm an entrepreneur energy and sort of in a reflected state of glory.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real psychological phenomenon, basking in reflective glory. No matter how experienced you are, you're going to fall into it every once in a while. Maybe you can train yourself out of it. I'm not sure. I mean, I know that I've experienced basking in reflective glory. Maybe I experience it a little bit now and then, but probably less than I used to. It's this idea of feeling good for accomplishments that you are associating yourself with kind of secondhand. So it might be because, you live in Los Angeles and you think because you live in Los Angeles, you feel like you're a movie star. You're an aspiring actor and you haven't gone to any auditions and you haven't been taking any classes to improve your craft. But still somehow in your mind, you've kind of convinced yourself you're a movie star because you live in Los Angeles or because you call yourself an actor. That can be useful and inspiring and it can help propel you. But if you're not careful, next thing you know, you wake up and you're 85 years old and you're on your deathbed and you haven't done anything. One of the most powerful elements of creativity, which is being able to give and being able to think about the way that you're helping somebody. I actually had a conversation with Seth Godin on my podcast not too long ago, and he was talking about the greatest antidote to fear, and I would say also the greatest antidote to like writer's block or thought leader's block is generosity. If you think about who you're trying to help and what problem they have and what it is that you have that might help them, then it starts to feel pretty selfish if you're like, oh, I can't think of anything or yeah, I'm afraid. It's good to just constantly remind yourself to reconnect with how are you going to help somebody. If you think about, I'm not an expert, it can be a disarming thing to say. Even is to say, yeah, I'm not an expert on this, but here's what I did. I did this and that and the other thing, and here's what happened. And it seems like it's a magical phrase to use to not only escape your own BS, but to also drop the guard of people who might be listening to you skeptically. It's like, oh, this person says that they're not an expert. Oh, but those experiences and those observations that this person has are pretty powerful. Like that's good. I just learned something.
If I remember correctly, you said self-deception is feeling just fine about not doing what you set out to do as a goal.
Yes, I think self-deception, we're constantly self-deceiving. I've really admired the work of Dan Ariely, who is a behavioral scientist that I had the pleasure of working with a little bit. And he's got a great book called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. And there's just some fascinating studies in there, such as they would give people these sort of, they were number puzzles, pretty easy number puzzles, but they didn't have enough time to possibly finish them. And then they would say, in one condition, they would say, oh, okay, well, when you're done, go to the back of the room, tally up your score and put it in the paper shredder and then pay yourself for the number of answers you got right. And, they compared that with people who they actually did check their scores and stuff. And like, everybody cheated, and they didn't cheat like a lot. Like there's a few people who are kind of psychopathic who say, oh, well, this is a situation where I can cheat and I can get paid the maximum number for getting all the answers right. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that. Almost nobody does that. People cheat just a little bit. And the reason they cheat just a little bit is their own self-perception, is that if they cheated a lot, well, then they might feel bad about themselves. They would see themselves as a liar. None of us sees ourselves as a liar. But what probably happened was that there was self-deception going on where maybe they're checking their answers and they're like, that was what I was going to put for that one. Or, I got a late start. I'll give myself an extra couple or something like that. These little sort of white lies that keep you feeling like you're an honest person, but in fact, you're actually cheating a little bit, which is a hard thing for a lot of people to hear, I think. It's hard for me to admit. I don't think I wouldn't have cheated in that study, but the truth is I probably would have. Who knows? Because everybody did. Now, I think that is important and relevant to getting work done, to getting creative work done, especially because creative work is really uncomfortable. You've got this thing that you want to make, but there's always something going on that you could decide, I'm just going to check my email. I'm going to look at Facebook for a little while. I'm kind of feeling under the weather today. I'm not going to write this thing. There's all these different ways that you can self-deceive and prevent yourself from actually doing the work.
I really liked a metaphor that you dropped on me. It's like learning to ride a bike with only the neighborhood kids to guide you.
I guess we were talking about how the older neighborhood kids who knew how to ride a bike were like, it's easy. You just get up and you just ride. And, you're thinking, how's it even possible? You're just going to fall over, obviously. It doesn't make sense that riding a bike would work. And then one day you eventually get it. And now you've forgotten what it's like to not ride a bike. And so many things like that, when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to creative endeavors, are like that. It's so scary. It's so daunting before you write your first blog post or publish your first podcast episode or write your first book. But once you do it and once it's out there, suddenly your entire relationship with it just changes. It's alive and it's real, and you're on the other side of that scary barrier that there was before. And so now it doesn't seem so scary and daunting like it did before.
I know that your new book that you've just finished the first draft for has a secret mission. And I think that it's so relevant to anyone looking to start a podcast.
Yeah, I think that's very easy to get distracted, especially in this day where there's just instant access to information all over the world and people are having discussions and arguments about all sorts of different things. And keep in mind that as they're doing that, they're putting money in somebody else's pocket because these platforms are run off of user data and attention and selling advertising and stuff. Not that they're not useful, not that I don't love Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, but like they want your attention. And there's certain things that are going to get your attention and they're biased towards those things. If you're going to get in an argument with somebody about something, Facebook loves that. You spend more time on Facebook. They can sell more advertising. And because of that, the outlet that creates the information is incentivized to make that information more controversial, more rage-inducing, prod at the ugly parts of humanity to get people to respond and so they can make more money. So if you ignore that, if you're able to ignore some of that and instead concentrate on what you can do with your attention, think of the opportunity cost lost, what you can do with your attention, how you can take your own personality and point of view and experiences and turn them into some piece of art that touches other people and inspires them. That's pretty amazing. I just want to give people the tools necessary to break free of the distractions and make their masterpieces.
Which is why I want to be able to give people practical ways to get into it. And obviously, nobody loves to hear the words, it's hard work. So in the name of just getting people started, what is one of the top practical ways you could offer for as an author who's been published and a serial podcaster who's just really put together a nice body of work with the people that you've interviewed? What's the best way you would say, just step one is this?
All right. I think this wraps up into some of the things that we've talked about, Philip. We've talked about self-deception. We've talked about learning and kind of getting on the other side of that barrier and making things real so you can actually respond to them. And then we've talked about what the sort of opportunity costs of of your time and attention concentrating on things other than putting your work out into the world. So I think the number one thing is to choose some kind of a daily deliverable. So you can prevent yourself from self-deceiving. It should be a ridiculously easy daily deliverable. So if you're just starting to write, 1,000 words a day would be the wrong choice, because you might get through 1 day, 2 days, 3 days of 1,000 words a day. But one day you're going to wake up and there's going to be a hole in your sock and, you've got to run to the store right now and buy new socks or something. You're going to make an excuse about why you can't write your 1,000 words. And the truth is because it's painful and it's you just can't handle it anymore. So if you were a beginning writer, I would say 100 words a day. Now, what can you do with 100 words? Like it's so short, but it's so short that it makes it difficult for you to make an excuse. Now, then you pick a time and a time each day, and you do that daily deliverable. One thing you're shipping, you're putting it out on Medium, you're putting it out on a blog. Don't worry about what the blog is called or who you're going to host it with. Just pick. It doesn't matter. Just get it out there. And suddenly you get it out there, and a flip switches in you the first time you ship something. Suddenly you know how to ride the bike, or suddenly it's not as scary as it used to be. You wonder why you needed training wheels before. And so if you're able to do that every day, then you're building a habit. And then maybe you're able to bump up because building the habit itself is an accomplishment. So that's why you pick the ridiculously easy daily deliverable. Now, then after a little while, you're able to bump it up. Maybe you're doing 250 words a day or 200 words a day or 150. And then you just keep going and and don't be afraid to repeat yourself. Write the same darn post over again, but just from memory, and you'll probably say it differently and better than you did before. Now you're putting something out there every day. You have a habit, and just by virtue of having that habit, it pushes away some of the distractions and other things that you might have used that time and attention for. And it grows like a crack in a sidewalk, like the Grand Canyon. It just keeps growing. It
really does work, because I think there's a great book that a lot of people are familiar with by the name of The 4 Agreements that certainly changed my life at the age of 14 when I first came across it. And it has the first agreement, and you got to ask yourself why it's the first one. It says, be impeccable with your word, which can be interpreted as, keeping your word to yourself first and foremost. And I think that really goes hand in hand with what you're saying.
Yeah, and you start small enough that you can be consistent with your own sense of integrity, your own sense of wanting to do what you say you'll do. And that's something that's a skill that you have to build. You don't want to overdo it, because you can burn yourself out. You can punish yourself if you set out too big.
Just so everyone's aware, David is one of the rare few people who actually get back to you when you reach out to them. And I think the best way would be Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter's great. I'm very active on Twitter at Kadavy, Kadavy.
Amazing. And I'll be sure to have that in the show notes too. So David Kadavy, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch.
Thank you, Phillip.
Thanks for listening. I hope this blueprint will help you own the rhythm in your space. Feel free to subscribe and reach out to me on Instagram and Twitter at Phillip Lanos, PhillipLanos. Also, you can visit owntherhythm.com if you want help producing your podcast. Open heart, open mind, and ask questions. Stay tuned for the next blueprint.